Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us. Um, Today we're tackling a question that I think a lot of us have thought about at one point or another, and
Hmm.
that is higher education the right move for me? And you might be in that place right now where you're like looking at college applications and thinking like, oh, this is so overwhelming, or maybe you're just curious if it's really, worth it in today's world. Like, does that degree actually get you where you want to go? We've got some interesting perspectives from the Fluent podcast to dig into, and I think this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, I think it's a question that there's no easy answer to, and that's why it's good to explore it a little bit.
For sure, for sure.
So let's back up a second, make sure we're all on the same page here. What does higher education even mean? I mean, we all kind of know it's like college after high school, but
Yeah.
Fluent made this point about it being more than just, stuffing your brain with facts. Yeah, they're definitely right about that. It's more like you're developing a set of skills you can use your whole life, not just memorizing stuff that, could be outdated tomorrow.
Mm.
It's more about being able to think critically, solve problems, work well with others. Those are skills that'll help you no matter what job you end up in.
Right. It's like if you learn to code, it's not just about knowing the language itself, it's about how to think like a programmer to solve problems.
Right.
Makes sense. So Fluent mentioned some reasons why people go for higher ed. Better jobs, personal growth, the adventure of, studying in a new place. But how did these things really hold up when the world's changing so fast?
Well, let's look at career prep as an example.
Hmm.
Yeah, a lot of jobs need a certain degree or certificate, but that's not the whole story. I mean, think about all the jobs that exist now that didn't exist 10 years ago.
Mm.
Data science, AI ethics, all these things. So higher ed, it's like it's supposed to help you become a lifelong learner, someone who can keep up and adapt no matter what new jobs come along.
So it's not just about getting that job, it's about being ready for whatever jobs come next. That's a good way to put it. Fluent also talked about how expensive and hard higher ed can be. Were you surprised by any of the things people were worried about?
Not really. Those are definitely things people worry about, especially with how expensive college is. But I think we forget that higher education doesn't always mean 4 years at a big university. There are associate degrees, vocational programs, online courses. It's about figuring out what works for you. Will a degree really help you get a better job? Can you afford it without being in debt forever? Those are tough questions, but you got to ask them.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a big investment. And sometimes just the thought of college is scary. Like, what if I'm not smart enough? Fluent talked about that fear too.
Oh, yeah, that's more common than you think. But colleges, they want their students to do well. They have tutors, study groups, advisors. It's all set up to help you succeed.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back to what we were saying about learning itself.
Yeah.
It's not about being naturally brilliant. It's about developing good study habits, knowing how to get help, and figuring out how you learn best. Do you learn by listening, by working with other people? Knowing yourself is super important.
That's a good point. And it makes me think about something Fluent brought up that I found really interesting. Do you actually need a college degree to be successful in life? They said no, but it wasn't a simple no. I'm curious what you think.
It's a tricky question for sure. We all know those stories about people who dropped out of college and started huge companies,
Hmm.
and that's inspiring. But we also got to remember that even those people often have skills they picked up in school.
Yeah.
Critical thinking, communication, money management, and stuff like that. Those are things everyone needs to be successful. It's not really about the degree itself. It's more about what you learn and how you use it,
Mm.
you know? So it really boils down to like, what does success even mean for you? Like what are your goals and what do you need to learn to reach them? Sometimes a regular degree is the best way to go, but sometimes it might be like a mix of online courses, apprenticeships, or just learning stuff on your own.
Yeah, I love that idea of figuring out what works best for you, not just doing what everyone else does. Fluent also talked about studying abroad, which always sounds so exciting. They mentioned all the fun stuff, but also the challenges. What advice would you give someone thinking about studying in another country?
Oh, yeah. Studying abroad can be amazing, like academically and personally. Imagine being immersed in a whole new culture, seeing the world from a different perspective,
Mm.
making friends with people from all over the place. But it's not something to just jump into without thinking. You really got to do your research.
So, where do you even start with that? What are the most important things to figure out?
Start with the practical stuff like visas. Every country has different rules, and
Yeah.
you don't want to get stuck somewhere. Then there's housing. Do they guarantee housing for international students, or do you have to find your own place? And tuition fees can be totally different too. Plus, don't forget about how much it costs to live there. Like London or Tokyo are going to be way more expensive than a small town in, Asia or somewhere.
Right, right. What about language skills? Fluent mentioned those tests like TOEFL and IELTS. What are those all about?
Those are tests to see how good your English is. Lots of universities, especially in English-speaking countries, they want you to get a certain score on those tests before they'll let you in. So if you want to study somewhere where they don't speak English as the main language, you got to check what their rules are and maybe start studying for those tests.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. Any tips for making all that research a little less overwhelming?
Honestly, the best thing you can do is talk to people who've already studied abroad, especially in the countries you're interested in. They can give you advice from their own experience, tell you about things you might not find online. They've been there. They know what it's really like.
That's a great idea. It's like having your own personal guide. So, going back to what Fluent said about doing your research, it sounds like that's important for everything. Whether you're looking at traditional colleges, online programs, or starting in another country.
Totally. Research is super important, but it's also important to think about how you learn best and what you want to get out of the whole experience. Are you someone who likes a structured classroom? Or do you prefer to learn online at your own pace? Do you need a lot of guidance, or are you more independent? And the biggest question is, what do you hope to achieve? Answering those questions will help you narrow things down and find the path that's right for you.
It's about making your own choices, not just doing what everyone else is doing. And I think that's something we can all apply to our lives, not just when it comes to education. It's about taking charge and figuring out what works for you. As we're wrapping up this deep dive, I keep thinking about how Fluent said that higher education isn't just about getting that piece of paper, the degree. It's more about like becoming a lifelong learner, always growing and developing.
Exactly. It's about learning to adapt, to think outside the box, to communicate your ideas clearly. Those are things that'll help you no matter what you end up doing in life, whether you start your own business, lead a team, or just try to make sense of this crazy world we live in.
We've covered so much today, like what higher education even means in today's world and the practical stuff like cost and how hard it is, and even studying abroad. But for me, the biggest takeaway is that idea of matching your education to your own goals and how you learn best.
And that means knowing yourself, which a lot of us are still working on. It's about asking yourself those tough questions. What am I passionate about? What am I good at? What am I not so good at? What kind of impact do I want to make on the world? And could higher education in whatever form help me get there?
That's a really thought-provoking question to leave our listeners with. I know I've got a lot to think about after this conversation. We want to hear from you too. What stuck with you from this episode? What questions are you still thinking about? Come chat with us on social media and let's keep this conversation going.
And remember, learning never really stops. Stay curious, be open to new things, and never stop exploring.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into higher education. We'll put links to the Fluent podcast in the show notes if you want to check them out. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.